Hello everyone. Did you know only half the insulin your body makes each day is made because of the food you eat? What about the other 50%? You've changed the food you're eating, but you're not seeing the results you hoped for. If that's you, let me tell you about the 50% insulin problem and what you can do about it. Hello, this is old Butter Bob Briggs. I lost 145 pounds and made a video about how I did it called Butter Makes Your Pants Fall Off. And you can watch that here on my YouTube channel. But in this video, I want to talk to you about how half the insulin your body makes, and yes, I said half the insulin, 50% of the daily insulin your body produces has nothing to do with the food you eat. I call this the 50% insulin problem. Look, everyone in the low-carb community understands if you eat a high-carb meal, or a snack cake, or even worse, one of those big belly-washing soft drinks, your insulin will go way up fast. The message seems so simple. Carbs drive insulin, and insulin drives obesity. Cut the carbs, reduce the insulin, and lose the weight. Such a simple message, but is that the whole story? The idea that carbs increase insulin is true, and for some, simply cutting the carbs they eat is enough to solve their problem. But for others, maybe even for you, this might not be enough, because half your insulin problem is not an eating problem. So changing what you eat alone might not be enough to reverse it. You might need to add another strategy. In this video, I want you to see a side of this insulin problem that isn't very well known. I call this the 50% insulin problem. I want to very quickly show you a study that will explain what this problem is. And below you can see the name of the study. In this study, they looked at insulin levels throughout the day in a group of people. Half of the people were fat, the other half were thin. They tested these people's insulin levels after 10 hours of sleeping and not eating, and came up with the lowest level of constant insulin these people always have in their system. They call this the basal insulin secretion rate, but I'm going to call it their fasting insulin, because whenever you see this number in a study, any study, they call it the fasting insulin level. In other words, this fasting insulin number is a marker that tells us the minimum constant level of insulin that's always circulating in your blood, regardless of whether you're eating or not eating. It's always there. You see, your body releases a certain amount of insulin all day long. It happens while you're eating, and even when you're not eating, even when you're sleeping. And how high or how low this constant level is, this constant minimal level is, can best be tested after an overnight fast. This fasting insulin level could be thought of as a floor, or the lowest constant level of insulin, while your level after eating could be thought of as jumping up to the ceiling, or the highest temporary level. We all know our insulin jumps up to the ceiling a few times a day, but these high levels are temporary, and they depend on what we've been eating. On the other hand, the fasting level of insulin is constantly present, like the floor. It is the ground you stand on all the time. And this constant background level of insulin, this floor you stand on, this fasting insulin, tends to be much higher for fat people than for thin people. Now here's the reason I'm telling you about this stuff. They tested the day's total insulin to see what percentage of it happened after eating, and what percentage happened after was a part of their constant background amount. And do you know what they found? They found that this constant background level of insulin, this floor that your insulin never goes below, represents between 45 and 50% of the total insulin you produce each day. About half the insulin you produce each day is this constant background pool of insulin you always have circulating, regardless of whether you're eating or not. 50% of the insulin released each day is released as a constant background level, regardless of how fat or how thin you are. This 50% insulin problem is happening all through the day, and this is not dependent on what you're eating. The skinny person had a lower constant background level. They had a lower floor on average. But this was still about half the insulin they produced each day. And the fat people had a higher constant background level on average, but this was still about half the insulin they produced each day. This is the 50% insulin problem. And if half your daily insulin is higher than it should be, and it probably is if you're fat around the middle, then half the problem you have with insulin is not caused by what you eat alone. And if half the insulin you produce is not caused by the food you eat, then simply changing your food alone may not be enough to fix this problem. And I think that many people who have not been successful losing weight with a low-carb diet alone have found this out the hard way. If this 50% insulin problem is not related to food, what is it related to? The answer is, it is directly associated with how fat you are. As you can see from the graphs from several other studies, the fatter you are, the higher your fasting insulin level. The higher your fasting insulin level, the more background insulin you have all day long. And the sad thing is this: some people have higher fasting insulin, even when they're not eating, than normal people have after they eat. Just look at this graph from the work of Dr. Joseph Kraft. These people have fasting insulin rates that are higher than normal people have even after they eat. Is it any wonder why some people find it almost impossible to lose weight? Especially if they try to solve their 50% insulin problem by changing what they eat alone, but not changing when they eat. And we're going to talk about that more in a couple of minutes. As you'll see before the end of this video, changing when you eat is more effective at attacking this 50% insulin problem than changing what you eat alone. This 50% insulin problem happens all the time. But as we're about to see, the higher that background insulin is, the higher your insulin goes after eating. So even though the 50% insulin problem is not about food, it does affect how high your insulin spikes after you eat. As you'll see in this study published many years before the one we just talked about, they found your insulin levels after you eat are likely to rise 5 to 7 times higher by 1 hour after eating than whatever your fasting insulin level was. And if you're diabetic or you're pre-diabetic, this spike is likely to happen after 2 hours after eating. They found whatever your fasting insulin number is after you eat, your body will release an amount of insulin an average of 5 to 7 times higher than whatever that level, that constant background level is. Remember, these are averages. For some, the spike could be much higher or a little lower. But the important thing to remember is this: the spike in insulin after you eat is based on how high or how low your fasting insulin levels are. To make this a little more clear, let's look at an example with some real numbers. You know, if a person has a fasting insulin level of, say, 8 microunits, after that person eats, their average insulin, the spike after they eat, will be 5 to 7 times higher. Their after eating insulin will rise to an average level of between 45 to 56 microunits, which is within the normal range. They ate a meal, but because their fasting insulin number was fairly low, their after eating numbers stayed in the fairly normal range. But let's say a person had a high fasting insulin level of 30 microunits. First, that person is likely to be fat, as we've seen in the other graphs, if they have a number that high. And so after that fat person with a fasting insulin number of 30 eats the same meal the skinny person ate, the same meal, their insulin would rise to 150 to 210 microunits, which is 5 to 7 times higher than that fat person's fasting insulin number. And it's 3 times higher than the skinny person's, who just ate the exact same food. Both people ate the same meal, but the higher the constant background insulin, the higher the 50% insulin problem, the higher their insulin spikes after after eating. Both these people had a spike after eating, which is normal, but because the 50% insulin problem was much higher in the fat person, their insulin jumped to a level 3 times higher than the thin person who ate the same food that they did. By the way, I found this to be true for myself when I took an insulin glucose tolerance test in October of 2015. Since being normal weight, I have a fasting insulin level of about 3 microunits. And after taking a glucose test, my insulin level rose to 18, which is about 6 times higher than my fasting level, which was within that average range. Then by the 3rd hour, I was back down to the 3 microunits, which is my fasting level. We all know that some foods like carbs and lean processed protein, like whey protein powders, cause your insulin to go very high after eating. But this insulin only amounts to 50% of your insulin problem. What you eat determines this number, so when you eat low carb, you keep this number lower. The other 50% of your daily insulin is associated with how fat you are. It is an insulin problem, and the best way to solve it is to periodically hold insulin very low. As low as possible, and this low insulin will allow us to begin burning up what extra body fat we have around your belly and your butt and your chinny chin. The association between how fat you are and how high your constant background insulin levels are could be pictured as an internal fat thermostat, which has been called the body set weight. In other words, the higher fasting insulin level, that constant background insulin that we've been talking about, then however high or low that rate is, will determine how high your insulin spikes after eating. All these things are like a thermostat that sets how much fat the body holds on to. The more insulin, the higher the body sets your fat weight thermostat. If insulin levels cause the body to set the amount of fat you carry to a certain level, then the question becomes, could you turn down that thermostat by lowering and keeping low your constant background insulin levels? Look, I think the obvious answer to this question is yes. And if you want to turn down this thermostat, you need to use the most effective strategy you can find to get insulin down as low as possible and hold it there as often as possible. When I say as often as possible, I'm talking about adding an element of timing to the low carb idea. The low carb idea is about what to eat and what not to eat to keep insulin low. But what I'm talking about is not about what to eat. It is about the timing of eating. Not eating for a period of time, even a short period like 16 to 24 hours, is very effective at lowering insulin. A short fast actually lowers insulin better than low carb. And it's cheap, it's simple, and best of all, not eating for short periods of time is nature's way to balance the books. Low carb, high fat is great in many ways because it imitates fasting. And low carb is very effective at lowering insulin after you eat. But fasting is the real deal because any eating raises insulin, no matter what you eat. Low carb foods are great at keeping the after eating insulin spike lower. But a short 16 to 24 hour fast is 50% more effective than even low carb at lowering insulin. So what does fasting do? Fasting 24 hours every other day has been shown to increase how sensitive your body is to insulin. Being more sensitive to something is easily understood by thinking about how alcohol affects someone. If a person is not used to drinking, just 1 or 2 drinks and they'll really feel it. The same could be said about insulin. The more sensitive you are, the less it will take to get this job done. In the short time of 22 days of fasting every other day, people became 7 times more sensitive to insulin. 7 times more sensitive. Just fasting every other day for about 3 weeks makes you 7 times more sensitive to insulin. Folks, this is amazing stuff. And it gets better. On on the every other fasting day, their fasting insulin was 57% lower. That's a lowering of the background insulin and a lowering of the 50% insulin problem every other day by over half, by almost 60%. And this not eating every other day increased the body's fat burning by 58%. 58% increase in fat burning is freaking amazing. And that's your belly being burned up at a rate almost 60% higher. And I want to point something out about this study that we're looking at. These graphs come from. The people in the study who were fasting every other day were not eating low carb on their eating days. They were eating whatever the heck they wanted. So you can just imagine how much better, lower their insulin would have been had they eaten a low carb diet on their eating day. Just imagine how much faster their results would have been. In another study, not eating carbohydrates at all for 3 days lowered insulin 48%. But not eating anything for 3 days or fasting lowered the insulin rate by a whopping 69%. As you can see, low carb is great, but fasting is almost 50% better than low carb at lowering your insulin. And this 1-2 punch, 1-2 of eating low carb, high fat during eating times, and then short 16 to 24 hour fasts, is the strategy I used and the one I recommend to you. No other strategy is more effective, and it's more sustainable too. This is something you can actually do long term, folks. As we've seen, not eating for 3 days lowered insulin almost 70%, but fasting that long might be too hard for some people to do. But here's the good news. 2/3 of that 70% reduction in insulin over a 3-day fast is achieved in the first 24 hours. In other words, if 3 days of fasting makes your insulin go down 70%, the good news is during the first day of that fast, 70% of that 70% of the insulin reduction has already happened. 2/3. So even a 24-hour fast reduces insulin almost as much as 3-day fast could do, and a short 24-hour fast from dinner time today until dinner time tomorrow is really easy to do, and it's much more sustainable long term than thinking about doing a 3-day fast on a regular basis. Nothing wrong with a 3-day fast. Now just look what happens during a short fast. These are some great graphics. After just 11 hours, fatty acids, this is your fat being released, folks. Just look at that steep rise around 11 hours. That's your big belly slowly but surely being burned up with a little fasting time each day. After just 13 hours, ketones are greatly increased. As you know, ketones are made from your body's fat and used by the body as a substitute energy source. Everybody in the low carb world worries about whether they're in ketosis or not. But as you can see, after just 13 hours, ketones are greatly increasing. You're making ketones while fasting. These ketones can continue to rise higher and higher for days if you're on a longer fast. So long as you fast, they just keep rising. Longer fasts have a higher rate of ketones, but you don't have to do long fasts. Simply do a good 16 to 24 hour fast and know that your ketones are on a steep rise after 13 hours. And insulin falls a lot by 3 to 4 hours after eating. And then about 10 hours after eating, they really fall a great deal more. Remember, 70% of the fall in insulin during a long fast, a 3-day fast, happens during the first 24 hours. So most insulin, the most of the insulin that goes down that happens in a long fast happens on the 24 hours, during the 24 hours. So, eat a low carb, high fat diet on your eating days and allow the appetite, the complete appetite control that diet gives you to not eat when not hungry. This not eating when not hungry is fasting. It's easy to do. You're already doing it now when you sleep. All you need to do is extend the time. Delaying eating breakfast for a few hours can give you a 16-hour fast, and most of that time you were asleep, so it's easy. Now, a video like this can't go into all the benefits of fasting, so if you really want to know more about fasting, the most complete source of information, and I mean the most complete source, can be found on Dr. Jason Fung's excellent blog. He has a huge, free 26-part blog series about fasting that is a wealth of information on this topic. There really is not a better source on the internet about intermittent fasting. Now, I want to thank you for watching, and I hope this helps you. While you're here on YouTube, I hope you'll watch some of my other videos or visit me on Facebook or visit my blog at www.buttermakesyourpantsfalloff.com. Thank you and goodbye.